Copenhagen, Denmark, August the 10th, 2017. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, one of Europe's most respected freelance journalists stepped onto the deck of a homemade submarine. Standing beside her was its creator, Peter Madsen, a Danish inventor celebrated by many as an engineering genius. He had spent years building rockets, experimenting with space technology, and capturing the imagination of people who believed that ordinary citizens could one day reach the stars. To Kim Wall, this was simply another assignment. She had interviewed politicians, activists, and people living through wars and humanitarian crises. She had traveled to some of the world's most dangerous places, searching for stories that others overlooked. An interview aboard an experimental submarine seemed unusual, but it didn't seem dangerous. Before climbing below deck, Kim sent one last message to her partner. "I'm still alive, by the way. We're about to dive." It was lighthearted, reassuring, the kind of message no one thinks twice about. Hours later, she was gone. The submarine had vanished, and the only person who surfaced alive had a story that would change again, and again, and again. This is the story of Kim Wall. The Last Voyage. This is the story of how the truth was recovered from the sea, one piece at a time, and of the woman the headlines almost erased. Before the headlines, before the international media attention, Kim Wall was a journalist driven by curiosity. Born in Sweden in 1987, she grew up fascinated by people and the stories that shaped their lives. While many reporters chased breaking news, Kim preferred something different. She sought out stories hidden beneath the surface. Stories about identity, inequality, science, culture, and the people living at the edges of society. Her work took her across the globe. She reported from Haiti after the devastating earthquake. She covered post-conflict communities in Sri Lanka. She documented life in Uganda, China, North Korea, and Cuba. Her writing appeared in internationally recognized publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Time, Foreign Policy, and Vice. Colleagues admired her ability to connect with people. Friends described her as intelligent, adventurous, and deeply compassionate. She believed journalism wasn't simply about reporting facts. It was about helping people understand one another. By the summer of 2017, Kim was living in Copenhagen with her partner, Ole Staub. Together, they were preparing to move to Beijing, the next chapter in a life spent crossing borders. Professionally, Kim was thriving. Personally, she was excited about the future. Then an opportunity arrived that seemed too unusual to ignore. Peter Madsen was unlike anyone Kim had interviewed before. To some, he was an eccentric inventor. To others, he was a visionary. For years, he had become something of a celebrity within Denmark's engineering community. Without the backing of a major corporation or government agency, he had built rockets, founded amateur aerospace organizations, and designed one of the world's largest privately built submarines. The submarine was called the UC3 Nautilus. Nearly 18 meters long and constructed largely through private funding and volunteer effort, it had attracted journalists from around the world. Madsen enjoyed the attention. He welcomed documentaries, television crews, interviews. He cultivated the image of a brilliant outsider, someone challenging the limits of what one individual could achieve. To many people, he was fascinating. To Kim Wall, he was simply another story waiting to be told. Kim reached out to Peter Madsen, hoping to interview him about his projects and ambitions. At first, arranging the interview proved difficult. Schedules changed, meetings were postponed. Then on August the 10th, an opportunity finally appeared. Madsen invited Kim to meet him aboard the UC3 Nautilus for an evening interview. The plan was straightforward. They would sail through the waters south of Copenhagen, conduct the interview and return later that evening. Kim accepted. Before leaving, she told her partner she expected to be home after the interview. She packed lightly a notebook, recording equipment, the tools of her profession. Nothing suggested this assignment would be any different from the dozens she had completed before. As evening approached, Kim climbed aboard the submarine. Several people watched the vessel leave Copenhagen harbor. Some even photographed it as it disappeared toward the horizon. It was the last confirmed sighting of Kim Wall alive. At around 8:30 that evening, she sent her final messages. She told Ole that everything was going well. She expected to be back later. Then the messages stopped. As darkness settled over the Baltic Sea, no one yet realized that what had begun as an ordinary interview was about to become one of the most shocking criminal investigations in Denmark's history. As the lights of Copenhagen reflected across the water, Ole Stubb expected a simple text message. Kim had told him she would be home after the interview. It wasn't unusual for her work to run a little late, but as the hours passed, the silence became impossible to ignore. His messages went unanswered. His calls went straight to voicemail. The woman who had spent years reporting from some of the world's most dangerous places had simply disappeared. Shortly after midnight, Ole contacted the authorities. At first, it was treated as a missing person case. Perhaps the submarine had experienced a mechanical problem. Perhaps communication had failed. Perhaps they had docked somewhere unexpected. No one yet imagined how extraordinary the next few hours would become. As dawn broke over the Øresund Strait, Danish authorities launched a search, unlike any they had conducted before. Rescue boats scanned the water. Helicopters circled overhead. The Danish Navy joined the operation, searching for the UC3 Nautilus. The submarine was difficult to miss. Nearly 18 meters long and constructed from steel, it was one of the largest privately built submarines in the world. If it was still afloat, someone would find it. But hour after hour, there was no sign of either the vessel or its 2 passengers. Then, at around 10:30 on the morning of August the 11th, a lighthouse operator spotted something in Kogi Bay. It was the Nautilus. Rescue crews immediately changed course, but before they could reach it, something unexpected happened. As rescuers approached, Peter Madsen emerged from the submarine. He appeared calm. He exchanged a few words with the rescue crew. Then, almost unbelievably, the Nautilus began taking on water. Within minutes, the submarine slipped beneath the surface. The vessel that investigators desperately needed as evidence disappeared beneath the Baltic Sea. Madsen was pulled from the water unharmed, but there was one glaring problem. He was alone. Kim Wall was nowhere to be seen. When officers asked where she was, Madsen gave an answer that seemed tragic but plausible. He claimed he had dropped Kim safely ashore the previous evening. According to him, she had left the submarine hours earlier. If that was true, then where was she? Investigators quickly checked Madsen's account. No one had seen Kim return to land. There was no CCTV footage showing her leaving the harbor. No taxi records, no witnesses. No evidence that she had ever stepped off the submarine alive. Meanwhile, Kim's family, friends, and colleagues became increasingly worried. The search expanded. Police appealed to the public for information. What had started as a rescue operation was slowly becoming something far more serious. Then, under further questioning, Madsen changed his story. He now claimed that Kim had died accidentally while they were still aboard the submarine. According to this new version, a heavy hatch had suddenly fallen, striking her on the head. Panicked, he said he had buried her body at sea. The explanation immediately raised new questions. If it had been a tragic accident, why hadn't he called for help? Why had he told police she had been safely dropped off? And why had the submarine sunk just as rescuers arrived? Each answer only seemed to create more questions. Investigators refused to rely solely on Madsen's statements. Instead, they turned to forensic evidence. Divers were sent to recover the sunken submarine from the seabed. Marine specialists examined every compartment. Forensic teams searched for biological evidence. Engineers analyzed whether Madsen's explanation about the submarine sinking was even possible. At the same time, police reconstructed the couple's final hours, using phone records, text messages, GPS data, and witness statements. Piece by piece, a different picture began to emerge, one that did not match Madsen's account. And then, 11 days after Kim Wall boarded that submarine, the sea gave up its first answer. When Kim Wall disappeared, investigators were faced with an impossible challenge. The only person who could explain what happened inside the submarine was Peter Madsen, and his story kept changing. So instead of relying on his words, investigators turned to the evidence. The sea, the submarine, the forensic findings. Every discovery brought them closer to understanding what happened during Kim's final hours. On August the 21st, 11 days after Kim disappeared, a cyclist walking near a beach on the southwest coast of Amager made a disturbing discovery. A woman's torso had washed ashore. Authorities immediately began testing the remains. The results confirmed what Kim's family had feared. It was Kim Wall. The discovery transformed the case. This was no longer a missing person investigation. It was a murder investigation. The forensic examination revealed that Kim had suffered multiple injuries, including 15 stab wounds. Investigators also found that metal had been attached to her torso in an apparent attempt to prevent it from floating. For police, this discovery directly contradicted Peter Madsen's earlier claim that Kim had died in an accident. But the investigation was far from over. Police still needed to understand what happened after Kim's death. Where was the rest of her body, and what other evidence had been left behind? The search continued for weeks. Working with specially trained cadaver dogs from the Swedish police, Danish divers searched the waters around Kogi Bay. On October the 6th, investigators found 2 plastic bags beneath the water. Inside were Kim's head, legs, clothing, and a knife. Several days later, divers recovered another important piece of evidence, a saw. Then, in November, police divers made 2 more discoveries. Kim's arms were recovered from the bay. Piece by piece, investigators were able to reconstruct the final stages of the crime. As investigators recovered more evidence, Peter Madsen's explanations continued to shift. Initially, he claimed Kim had left the submarine alive. That story collapsed when police found no evidence that she had ever returned to shore. Then he claimed Kim had died accidentally after being struck by the submarine's heavy hatch. But forensic findings challenged that explanation. When Kim's head was recovered, the examination found no signs of the type of blunt force trauma that would have supported that claim. The evidence did not match his story. Later, Madsen admitted that he had dismembered Kim's body. However, he continued to deny intentionally killing her. He suggested another explanation, that Kim may have died after being exposed to poisonous exhaust gases inside the submarine, while he was outside on the deck. But again, forensic evidence contradicted this version. The examination of Kim's body found no evidence that she had inhaled exhaust fumes. With each new explanation, investigators believed the same pattern was emerging, a story changing to fit the evidence. One of the most important questions during the investigation was not only what happened to Kim, but whether it had been planned. Prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed to a deliberate killing. During the investigation, police found violent material on Madsen's computer, including videos depicting women being killed. They also presented testimony from witnesses who described Madsen's interest in violent imagery and practices involving asphyxiation. The prosecution argued that this evidence provided important context about his state of mind. The defense challenged this interpretation and argued that such evidence didn't prove what happened aboard the submarine. Ultimately, the court would have to decide whether the evidence showed an accident or a deliberate act. On January 16, 2018, Peter Madsen was formally charged with murder, sexual assault, and improper handling of a corpse. The prosecution presented their reconstruction of what they believed happened aboard the UC3 Nautilus. They argued that Kim had been deliberately killed inside the submarine before Madsen attempted to conceal the crime. The defense maintained that Madsen had not intentionally murdered her. The trial began on March 8, 2018 at Copenhagen City Court. For weeks, judges heard evidence from forensic experts, investigators, witnesses, and specialists. They examined the changing explanations, the physical evidence, and the timeline of events. On April 25, 2018, the court reached its decision. Peter Madsen was found guilty of murder, sexual assault, and improper handling of a corpse. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Madsen appealed the decision. But on September 26, 2018, Denmark's Eastern High Court upheld the conviction and the sentence. The legal process was complete. The investigation had answered the question of who was responsible. But the exact cause of Kim Wall's death was never officially determined, and it did not need to be for the court to find that she had been murdered. And still, one question remained, the one the evidence could never answer. Why did someone who boarded a submarine for an interview never return? When a case receives international attention, there is a danger that the person at the center of it becomes reduced to the circumstances of their death. A headline, a photograph, a name attached to a crime. But Kim Wall was never just a victim in a murder investigation. Before the world knew her name, she was a journalist who spent her life telling the stories of others. She traveled across continents not because she wanted attention, but because she believed that understanding people was one of the most important things journalism could offer. Her work focused on communities that were often overlooked, people whose experiences rarely made international headlines. She wrote about politics, identity, culture, technology, and human struggles across the world. She had built a career around one simple idea: every person has a story worth hearing. Kim was only 30 years old when she died. She had already achieved what many journalists spend a lifetime working toward. Her writing had appeared in major publications. She had reported from difficult environments. She had earned the trust of people whose lives she documented. And she was just beginning to explore what came next. Friends and colleagues described her as curious, fearless, and deeply empathetic. She had a rare ability to enter unfamiliar worlds and make people feel seen. That quality had taken her around the globe. It was also what brought her aboard the UC3 Nautilus that night. She was doing what she had always done. Following a story, asking questions, trying to understand someone else's world. For Kim's family, the case was never about headlines or international attention. It was about losing a daughter, a sister, a person whose future had been stolen. Throughout the investigation and trial, Kim's loved ones remained focused on preserving her memory as a person, not allowing the details of the crime to define her. Because the reality is that Kim's story did not begin on the night she boarded the submarine. And it should not end there either. In the years following her death, Kim's family and friends worked to ensure that her name remained connected to journalism and storytelling. The Kim Wall Memorial Fund was established to support young journalists pursuing ambitious projects, particularly those involving international reporting and stories that cross borders and cultures. In many ways, it represented the values Kim herself carried throughout her career: curiosity, courage, and a belief that meaningful stories matter. The fund became a way to transform a tragedy into something that could help others continue the work Kim loved. The murder of Kim Wall shocked Denmark and the world because of the circumstances surrounding it. A journalist, an interview, a homemade submarine. A man whose explanations changed repeatedly, and an investigation that unfolded across the waters surrounding Copenhagen. But beyond the mystery in the investigation, the case leaves behind deeper questions. How well do we truly know the people we meet? How do we recognize danger when something appears ordinary? And how do we remember victims in a way that honors who they were, not only how they died? On the evening of August the 10th, 2017, Kim Wall stepped aboard the UC3 Nautilus because she wanted to tell a story. She never returned home. The investigation that followed uncovered one of Denmark's most disturbing crimes. But Kim's life was much bigger than the final moments that made her famous. She was a journalist, a traveler, a daughter, a friend, a person who believed the world became better when we listened to each other's stories. And perhaps that is the most important way to remember Kim Wall. Not as the victim of a crime, but as someone who spent her life making sure other people's stories were heard. Her name was Kim Wall. If Kim Wall's work means something to you, look up the Kim Wall Memorial Fund and tell someone a story worth hearing.